People often assume that growing old means life becomes quiet. They imagine peaceful mornings, a rocking chair on the porch, tea in a favorite cup, and the same routine every single day. I used to believe that too. Looking back now, I almost laugh at how wrong I was. My name hardly matters. Around the neighborhood, everyone simply calls me Grandma. Children wave at me from their bicycles, dog walkers smile politely, and delivery drivers know exactly where to leave my packages. I've lived on this little street for nearly 30 years. I have watched tiny trees become tall enough to shade the sidewalks, and I have seen children grow into adults with children of their own after my husband passed away. The house became painfully quiet. It wasn't the silence itself that hurt. It was the absence of small everyday moments. No footsteps in the hallway. No newspaper folded on the kitchen table. No gentle laughter filling the rooms. At first, I tried to keep myself busy by baking, knitting, and reading old mystery novels, but evenings always felt much longer than they used to. One afternoon, I baked far too many blueberry muffins. I knew I couldn't possibly eat them all before they became stale. Throwing them away felt wrong, so I wrapped a few in brown paper, tied them with a simple blue ribbon, and quietly placed them on the porch of a young family that had recently moved onto our street. I didn't leave my name, I simply walked away. The next morning, I noticed the package was gone. That was all. No note, no announcement, no dramatic reaction. Just an empty porch where the little parcel had been. Oddly enough, that tiny moment made me smile more than I had smiled in weeks. A few days later, I left fresh flowers on another doorstep. They came from my own garden, where roses had somehow survived despite my inconsistent gardening skills. I tied them together with a piece of twine and added a tiny handwritten card that simply wished someone a beautiful day again. No name, again, I quietly disappeared before anyone noticed. Soon it became my favorite little tradition. Sometimes I left homemade cookies, sometimes I left a second-hand novel that I had loved years earlier, sometimes it was a small bag of tomatoes from my vegetable garden or a jar of homemade strawberry jam. Nothing expensive, nothing extraordinary. Just small reminders that someone cared. I never expected anything in return. The truth is, I wasn't trying to make anyone grateful. I was trying to remind myself that kindness still existed. As the weeks passed, something interesting began to happen. The street looked different, not because the houses changed, the people changed. Neighbors who had barely nodded at each other suddenly stopped to help carry groceries. Someone planted colorful flowers near the community mailbox. Another family placed a basket of free books outside their fence. Children started drawing cheerful chalk pictures on the sidewalks again. Maybe those things would have happened anyway, or maybe kindness spreads quietly, just like sunlight through open curtains. Either way, I loved watching it happen, of course. Keeping my little tradition secret wasn't always easy. One afternoon I nearly got caught while leaving fresh apples on a porch. I had to hide behind an enormous maple tree while a golden retriever happily sniffed around the bag I had just placed there. The dog looked directly at me with such excitement that I was convinced he would reveal my hiding place. Instead, he simply wagged his tail. I almost laughed out loud. Moments like that made me feel 20 years younger. Every Sunday evening I would sit by my window with a notebook, planning tiny surprises for the coming week. It became a strange little hobby that filled my days with purpose. One neighbor loved gardening. Another enjoyed mystery novels. Someone else always decorated their porch for every season. I paid attention. Not in a nosy way, only enough to notice the little things that made people smile. It amazed me how often people overlook small acts of kindness simply because they expected grand gestures. Life rarely changes because of one enormous event. Sometimes it changes because of a single thoughtful moment repeated again and again. Months passed, autumn arrived. covering the sidewalks with golden leaves. The mornings became colder, the evenings arrived earlier still. Every week I prepared another anonymous gift, then one chilly Monday morning, everything changed. I opened my front door expecting nothing more than crisp autumn air. Instead, resting neatly on my welcome mat was a small brown paper package tied with the exact same shade of blue ribbon I always used. For several long seconds, I simply stared at it. I was absolutely certain of one thing: I had never left a gift for myself. For nearly a minute, I simply stood there, staring at the package on my doorstep. The blue ribbon caught my attention first. It wasn't just similar to the ribbon I always used. It looked identical. The knot had been tied the same way I tied mine. The paper had been folded with the same careful corners. Even the little sprig of dried lavender tucked beneath the ribbon reminded me of something I would have done myself. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not fear. Curiosity. I carried the package inside and placed it on my kitchen table. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, making the ribbon almost glow. When I finally opened it, I found an old gardening journal. It took me only a few seconds to recognize it. Years ago, I had donated dozens of books to a local charity shop after my husband passed away. Among them had been that journal. It contained sketches of flowers, notes about planting seasons, pressed leaves, and tiny observations from our garden. I had forgotten it even existed. Inside the cover rested a small handwritten card. There was no signature, only a single sentence: "Some memories deserve to come home." I gently closed the book and rested my hand on its cover. Someone had somehow found it. Someone had known it belonged to me. That thought stayed with me all day. During the following week, I couldn't stop wondering who had left it. Every face on the street suddenly became part of the mystery. The retired teacher who walked every morning. The cheerful mail carrier. The young couple with twin daughters. The college student who always carried too many grocery bags. The elderly widower who spent hours trimming his roses. Every neighbor seemed equally possible and equally impossible. I considered ending my little tradition. After all, perhaps someone had discovered my secret. But every time I prepared to stop, another anonymous gift appeared. One afternoon I found a tiny packet of wildflower seeds resting beside my mailbox. Another morning, someone placed a fresh loaf of homemade bread on my porch while it was still warm. A week later, I discovered an old black and white photograph tucked inside my newspaper. It showed our street nearly 40 years earlier. There I was, much younger, standing beside my husband as we planted the maple tree that now towered above the sidewalk. I had never seen that photograph before. My eyes filled with quiet emotion. Someone had gone through remarkable effort. The mystery no longer felt like a simple neighborhood game. It felt personal, yet somehow comforting. Instead of trying to catch the mysterious giver immediately, I decided to observe. For the first time in years, I slowed down enough to truly notice the rhythm of the neighborhood. Every morning curtains opened. At nearly the same time, children raced toward the school bus with backpacks bouncing behind them. Garden sprinklers started before sunrise. Neighbors waved from driveways. Dogs greeted each other more enthusiastically than their owners ever did. I realized something unexpected. Our street had become warmer than I remembered. People smiled more. They stopped to chat longer. They helped each other without being asked. One snowy afternoon, I watched 3 teenagers shovel an elderly neighbor's driveway before clearing their own. No one applauded them. No one recorded it. They simply did it. Another evening, someone quietly left canned food outside the home of a family who had recently lost their jobs. There was no note. No credit. Just kindness. As winter settled in, little acts of generosity seemed to appear everywhere. A repaired fence. Fresh cookies, bird feeders filled overnight, Flowers placed beside lonely front doors. At first, I wondered whether my anonymous gifts had inspired all of this. Eventually, I realized something more beautiful. Perhaps kindness had always existed. Maybe someone simply needed to make the first move. Then came the morning that changed everything again. When I opened my front door, another package waited patiently on the welcome mat. This one felt surprisingly heavy. Inside rested a small wooden box, polished until it shined softly in the morning light. I recognized it instantly. It had belonged to my husband. Years earlier, during one exhausting move between storage rooms, I had believed it was accidentally thrown away. I remembered searching every corner of the house for weeks. Inside the box were tiny keepsakes that meant almost nothing to anyone else. An old movie ticket, a faded postcard, a pressed autumn leaf, a tiny seashell from our first vacation together, objects worth almost nothing. Memories worth everything. Beneath them rested another handwritten note. The best treasures are never truly lost. This time I couldn't convince myself it was coincidence. Whoever was leaving these gifts didn't simply know my secret. Somehow, they knew pieces of my life that I had almost forgotten myself. And for the first time since this mystery began, I quietly decided that I was finally going to discover who had been leaving those impossible gifts at my door. The following days became an adventure. Unlike anything I had experienced in years, I wasn't chasing a criminal. I wasn't solving a dangerous mystery. I was searching for someone who had quietly reminded me that kindness always finds its way home. Every morning I woke up earlier than usual. I made my tea, sat beside the living room window, and watched the street slowly come to life. The sky turned from deep blue to soft gold. Birds landed on the maple tree my husband and I had planted decades ago. Neighbors stepped outside one by one, beginning another ordinary day. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, every few days another anonymous gift appeared. Never while I was watching. Never when I expected it. It almost felt magical. One afternoon I decided to stop looking for the person and start looking at the people. Instead of wondering who was responsible, I paid attention to how everyone around me had changed. The young family next door now baked extra bread for elderly neighbors. The college student mowed lawns during summer without asking for payment. Children began leaving cheerful drawings in lonely mailboxes. Someone repaired broken bicycles and quietly returned them to their owners. The RETIRED teacher started a tiny free library in front of her house. The widower with the beautiful roses placed fresh flowers every Friday on the porch of anyone who seemed to be having a difficult week. Our little street had become something completely different. It wasn't perfect. People still had difficult days. They still worried about bills, health, and family. But they no longer carried those worries alone. One snowy evening, as I watered the plants inside my warm kitchen, I noticed something that made me smile. Across the street, one neighbor quietly left a basket of fruit on another porch. A few minutes later, someone else left birdseed for an elderly couple. An hour later, a child carefully placed a handmade greeting card outside a house decorated with Christmas lights. No one waited for praise. No one expected applause. Everyone simply disappeared before anyone opened the door. At that moment, I understood something I hadn't realized before. The mystery had grown far beyond me. It no longer mattered who had started returning my gifts. Kindness had become part of the neighborhood itself. Several weeks later, another package appeared. Inside was nothing more than a folded sheet of paper. There was no signature. Only one short message. You thought you were changing one person's day. You changed an entire street. I read those words several times, then I quietly folded the note and placed it inside my husband's wooden memory box. It remains there even today. People often ask why our neighborhood feels different from Others, some say it is because of the gardens. Others believe it is the old trees or the peaceful streets. I simply smile. The real answer cannot be seen from a car window. It lives in small moments. A warm loaf of bread. Fresh flowers. A handwritten note. Someone clearing snow before sunrise. Someone remembering a birthday. Someone quietly helping without expecting anything in return. Years have passed since that first anonymous package appeared on my doorstep. To this day, I still don't know exactly who left it there. Sometimes I think it was one person. Sometimes I believe it was several neighbors working together. And sometimes I wonder whether discovering the truth would have ruined the magic. Perhaps some mysteries are more beautiful when they remain mysteries. Every Tuesday morning, I still wrap a small gift with a blue ribbon. Sometimes it is homemade cookies. Sometimes it is a book that once made me laugh. Sometimes it is flower seeds collected from my own garden. I leave the package quietly on someone's porch before sunrise. Then I walk home slowly, listening to birds waking up and watching the first rays of sunlight touch the rooftops. I never leave my name. I never wait for thanks, because after all these years, I have learned something that I wish I had understood much earlier. Kindness does not disappear. It travels. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes it takes years, but sooner or later, it always finds its way back to the person who first set it free. And every time I tie another blue ribbon around another anonymous gift, I cannot help but smile, because somewhere, perhaps tomorrow morning, someone else will open their front door and discover that the world is just a little kinder than they believed the night before.